point out that the only difference between a rut and a grave is the depth. So we have to make sure that if we're in a rut, we get out of that, because we don't want to be in a grave, and that means we're not doing any work and that our efforts are dead. Now, I've got a lot of reasons I want to share with you why I am encouraged. I stand before you today encouraged that we're winning this battle. And Dr. Wilkie and I have been involved for a long time. He started before Roe versus Wade. I was a Johnny-come-lately. I didn't start till 1975. But we've seen a lot develop. We've seen the movement evolve. We've seen technology move it ahead by leaps and bounds. And the March for Life is something I've mentioned where there's so many young people. NARAL's president last year or the year before got off the metro stop, and that place is totally overrun with pro-lifers that day going to the march. And she told her staff, there's so many of them. They're so young. And they are, you know, it scared the bejeepers out of her. And it should, because that's the future of our nation. That's where we're going. And they don't have the young people that we have standing up for the death camps of the abortion mills. We have them standing on our side for life. Funding of Planned Parenthood has been challenged on the federal level and has been challenged and stopped on the local level. You know, you may consider that a defeat that we had the vote on the Hill in Washington this past year on funding of Planned Parenthood, and we lost it. But I'll tell you, I was thrilled. Because 5 years ago, we never dreamed we'd have that kind of vote on Capitol Hill to end funding for the largest chain of abortion facilities in the nation. They have been in this ivory tower, and we have been assaulting that ivory tower with legislation, with education. I'm mentioning Planned Parenthood at least once a week on my radio broadcast because they're involved in so much. And that ivory tower is beginning to crack and crumble. And we need to keep the pressure up and just push it over until it falls into a bazillion pieces. It's been a record year for state legislation. As you mentioned, it's been so good, everybody's taken note. There's been 3 times more legislation than there ever has been in the past on the state level, protecting innocent human life from womb to tomb. And I wanted, you know you can be encouraged when the other side is really scared and concerned in talking about it. Casey Martin is the director of Planned Parenthood of the Southern Finger, that's in upstate New York. And he says this, he said, the sky is falling on Roe versus Wade. It fell further and faster in 2011 than in any year before. Now, doesn't that give you cause? That gives you cause to celebrate, to give each other a pat on the back, to be encouraged, and to jump out of that rut if that's where you find yourself. Rachel Maddow, do you know who she is? She's a lesbian, hardcore, pro-abortion commentator on MSNBC. I don't make a habit of watching her. I don't know that I've ever agreed with her on anything, so I didn't want to waste my time. But she recently called the legislative gains in states in 2011 breathtaking. That is her word. So she is shaking in her patent leather high heels in wherever New York, or wherever she operates from, because she knows Roe is living on borrowed time. And that's why it's so important that we continue to do our part and continue to be there for the babies. You know, God calls us to be faithful. He doesn't put the responsibility on our shoulders to win this. He's going to be the one that wins it. But he wants us to be faithful to the cause. You know, God isn't on our side. And if you say that, you're wrong. Now, let me explain that. God's on his own side. We are on God's side. And every day, I take a gut check, a soul check, a heart check, a mind check, to make sure that I'm on God's side. Not that I'm saying he's on my side, because my sinful heart, you know where that'll take me. So every day we need to make sure that we're on God's side. Now, in Ohio, there's been some great progress made. Our friends at Americans United for Life, you know, each year they rate the states. And we were like 17 out of 50, which isn't too bad. The top ones were Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Pennsylvania. The worst ones were what you might suspect, Hawaii, California, Washington State. But we had some great victories. One was the ban on abortions at 20 weeks or later. It's hard for the abortion industry to lobby against those bills, because we're talking about very close to viability, where obviously babies feel pain. They feel pain much earlier, but this they don't argue with. And we're not so sure we're going to see them tackle that in courts and challenge it. So that was a big victory. We've stopped funding for abortion in Obamacare on the state level. That's a big victory. When you're not paying for it and opening your purse strings of your tax dollars to kill unborn babies, that's a good day. They've strengthened parental consent laws. There can be a lot of loopholes in parental involvement laws, consent or notification, and they've done a great job of tightening those holes so that more children don't fall through the cracks. And we've had the referendum through Ohio that has been supported by a wide margin to opt out of Obamacare, which includes, of course, abortion on demand. So there's been a lot that's happened. There's one thing that I wish would have happened that didn't, and that's the heartbeat bill. Now, there are differences of opinions within the pro-life movement whether we should pursue this or not, and I respect those. I've done a lot of research and homework on this bill, and I'm an emphatic supporter of it, and I want to tell you why, briefly. There are those who feel we shouldn't do this because the Supreme Court will not likely support it when it gets there and challenged up to the court. And there are those who feel that if the court turns it down, Ruth Bader Ginsburg will write the majority opinion, and she's rabidly pro-abortion, that she will undermine all their incremental gains that we've made over the decades. Well, I think that's flatly inaccurate. And the reason I believe that is because we have 5 solid votes on the court. Now, math was never my strong subject, but I do know this. I know that 5 is the majority out of 9. And let me give you a little bit of history on the Supreme Court. Back when the Casey decision, Planned Parenthood versus Casey in Pennsylvania, was decided, Justice Kennedy had decided to side with the pro-life justices and reverse Roe versus Wade. They were writing the majority opinion to reverse Roe versus Wade when the other side got to him and he switched. And how they did that is they persuaded him that they would allow some common sense, incremental things to be ruled constitutional if he would refuse to reverse Roe versus Wade. He took them at their word, and then came the Nebraska partial birth abortion ban, which these supposedly semi-pro-life justices turned on Kennedy and voted that down, and he was livid. And if you read some of his latest writings on these court cases, one thing he makes very clear is he will not stand for the erosion of anything as far as those incremental gains we've made. As a matter of fact, he pointed out we need to make some more. And then when you add him and Roberts, Chief Justice, Justices Alito, Thomas, and Scalia, you have a majority. We know where those other 4 are. They would not support this. So if Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a majority opinion, she would need a majority of the justices to support that. Otherwise, it would have no power of law. So the argument that would undermine us is not there. Just a few years after the Supreme Court ruled that the Nebraska partial birth abortion law was unconstitutional, they reversed themselves 6 or 7 years later and approved the federal version that was almost identical. And we didn't have any erosion either of pro-life law.